That is a very, very robust discussion of the ways in which local responders could actually make a very big difference. Our final panelist is Emily Troutman. She is a journalist and writer who has assessed over the last 10 or 15 years the response and the costs of response and the role of international aid and structures of financing in most of the major disasters that we're acquainted with. Most notably the 2010 Haiti earthquake, where she has deeply examined what the role of finance, funding, and support has been and must continue to be. And she has, I think, a number of things to say to us about Nepal, but also in the context of the wider understanding of evolution of financing for disaster response. So Emily, please.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay, well, I have my timer here so that Jennifer doesn't have to haunt me.
Well, then good. I can move over here.
So I'm going to be talking about why prevention efforts in humanitarian aid often fail. And so a hint for you, and Jennifer gave it in her introduction, I'm an investigative journalist. We're going to follow the money. So which image do you think, if we were raising money for Nepal, which image would raise more money for our organization? If we just did a survey here by hand, how many of you think that the fallen down house would raise more money? Okay. How many of you think that the image of the little girl would raise more money? Okay, so you're outvoted, sir. So by 100 to 1, it's true that people give to people, right? It's something intuitive. It doesn't take a scientist. But this is stuff that has been researched. So which image do you think would raise more money now? So now it's a child versus another child, one who is sad and one who is happy. So by a show of hands, how many think that the happy child would raise more money? Okay, a few. How many of you think that the sad child would raise more money? More. So maybe 30% voted for the happy child. You know, we want to say that the happy child would raise more money, but that's just not a fact. If sorry. If you want to raise money, put a picture of a sad kid on your brochure. People give to people that they know, that they can identify with. It's something that we do with what I would call our heart brain, the heart part of our brain. We do it intuitively from feeling and instinct. We have something called the identifiable victim effect. Remember when the Syrian refugee image came up just a few weeks ago of a small child who'd been injured in the war. You know, when people see one image, baby Jessica is the classic example of an identifiable victim. She fell in a well. Everyone here is too young to remember that. But there was this baby who fell in a well once, and she raised thousands of dollars. But now we see that with GoFundMe, right? People give to individuals all the time because there's a story we can connect to. We give to people who we can identify with, even in a context of how we're feeling. So they've done a study of people going into a gym to go work out, and they'll ask people going into the gym, you know, how likely is it that refugees need access to water and food along the way? And they say, well, some. They ask the people when they come out of the gym, how likely is it that refugees need access to food and water? Thirsty people want to give more to thirsty people. So the people coming out of the gym can identify more with refugees when they're tired. Unbelievable, right? But this is real. So countries givings follow that pattern. We give to countries that we have colonial relationships with, that are close to us in proximity, that speak the same language. Politics plays a big part. We give to countries we like or want to influence. The news, of course, is a big part of why we give. We also just, as an extension of that, seem to love pain and suffering. So if in one study they asked people, would you give, and I'm paraphrasing here, would you give $50 to our organization? That's choice A. Or choice B, you can give $50 to our organization and run a marathon. What do you think people choose most often? They run the marathon. There's no logic to this, right? How many of you have run a marathon, a 5K or a 10K or something for charity? Yeah, we see this. Walk for the cure, right? Don't just give us $1,000. Ask your friends for $1,000 and then walk for 20 miles. Amazingly, you know, this is what people want to do. So actually the opposite holds true as well. Why don't people give? We don't give for any sort of logical reason. And once you start introducing logic into the conversation, people stop giving. So we disconnect from the heart brain and we start connecting to the logic brain, and then we don't want to give anymore. So more details, more facts means somebody's going to give less money, and they've tested it over and over again. Efficiency doesn't matter. So if I say you can choose between option A, which is an organization that can save 10 lives for $1, or option B, which can save 5 lives for $1, people who have $2, do you know what they do? They give $1 to each organization. Why? It's something in our mind, it's a cognitive bias about fairness. Well, they're both out there, they're both in Syria, they're trying to help, they're in Nepal, they're doing the best they can. They could have saved 20 kids for $2, but we saved 15 for $2, just because. That's just because. Need doesn't matter, so we can see that right now. Yemen. I mean, we have people, political candidates saying, what is Aleppo? What is Yemen? Ask your friends and family, they've never heard of that. We're not really raising money for the people who are most in need. It just doesn't work like that. Because it's emotional, it's not rational. You have to turn off your logical brain to understand why we give to charity. Of course, our problem is that preparedness is inherently an issue of logic, rationality, right? So if an earthquake struck Nepal again, what would happen? Is Nepal in a better position? How can we somehow overcome what our cognitive biases are? Well, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. So let's take a look at humanitarian assistance to Nepal since 1990. You see it's a pretty steady line. We're at 12 million, 8 million, 12 million. It's mostly food aid. There's a bump for some political turmoil. And then this right here, now you guys are PhDs and epidemiologists. I'm neither, but this is an outlier, right? This $325 million like that, right? This doesn't make sense. We've known that Nepal has earthquakes for centuries. We've known that they're vulnerable. And as everyone here mentioned, each year in Nepal, thousands of people, 2,000 people die on average each year in Nepal from floods and landslides. So the reality is, I'm sorry to tell you this, and I think others have inferred it, but the reality is that the money's gone. That money, that $325 million is gone. And most of it was spent in the first couple of weeks. And this is a pattern that just happens over and over again in disasters. And you know why? Because that first response is terribly expensive. So those 1,800 people who came to do search and rescue were only able to rescue 16 people. Now, I'm not saying that those 16 people aren't valuable, as Enzo mentioned, but we do need to think about this. So how much did that cost, right? So South Africa had an estimate that not every country's transparent about that, but South Africa said that they sent 40 people for a week. It cost $400,000. So that's $10,000 per person per week for this response. This slide right here, that's $20 million. Gone. Gone. Just like that. So we need to think about other principles besides just saving lives. And humanitarian principles do have some opportunity for us to think about disaster preparedness, prevention, thinking about the future. We do have an obligation to think about that, not just whether or not people are stuck in the rubble. The reality is that you and me don't have a lot of influence in this system. Sorry. Most of the money, last year was a banner year for humanitarian assistance. We raised $28 billion, but most of that money comes from governments. And actually, most of that money comes from only 5 governments. So 2/3 of the money, more than 2/3 of the money is coming from governments, so we don't really have a lot of say. Those governments decide where to send the money. They send half of it right away to 6 UN agencies, and this happens again and again. And you can look for these numbers online from the Global Humanitarian Assistance Group out of the UK. 1/3 of that money, that $28 billion, goes right away to ongoing crises. The top 3 crises in this case, Sudan, West Bank, Palestinian territories, and Syria. That's a pattern that holds true year after year. So the most priority crises get a really disproportionate slice of the pie. Now, this number is questionable. There is actually no way to track it, but based on what we know, only 4% of humanitarian assistance funding actually goes to disaster preparedness and prevention. And the reason that there's no way to know is that nobody keeps track. There is no unique identifier in any of the financial systems for humanitarian assistance which track disaster preparedness and prevention. It would be as easy as making a tag, a label, right? A data field. It doesn't exist. But experts estimate that it's 4%. Now, when it comes to development, that's that long-term funding, right? Not humanitarian assistance. That's the teach somebody to fish money, right? You'd think that preparedness would be better, prevention would be better, but it's not. Then the number goes down. Only 1% of that money seems to go to disaster preparedness and prevention. So what are our options if we're going to help Nepal for the future? Really, what are our options? As long as this sad kid is raising more money, we have to come up with a system that's smarter than us, that can outsmart our hearts, because this is what we do. This is human. This is human to human. We see a sad kid, we give money. That's just the way it is. So how do we figure it out? One thing would be to try and use logic to understand how much our approach right now actually costs. We don't know what aid costs. We're not tracking the money in a way that is accountable at all. We don't know what it costs that we have this emergency as opposed to preventative approach. So we could figure that out. We could set a fixed percentage of aid and humanitarian assistance to go to prevention and preparedness, just like setting part of your retirement fund out of your paycheck. That would be a good way to do it. We could also just demand accountability from people, and I know many of you in this room raised money for Nepal and other causes. You can decide you're going to take 10% out of the money that you raised, and you're going to prepare for the next disaster. You can do that yourselves. You don't have to just demand it from other organizations. So really the reason that we don't know what happened is because we haven't asked. So it's great that we have this symposium here today to ask, is Nepal doing better? $325 million just in that first part of the response. Is Nepal better? The reason that prevention efforts fail is because we don't try. We don't. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that riveting and fact-based approach to the dilemma we're in terms of funding and finances.